West African leaders met in Abuja this past weekend to grapple with the worrying surge of coups, spillover violence, and political rifts. Now, in a symbolic handover, Sierra Leone's President Julius Maada took the reins of ECOWAS from Nigeria's Bola Tinubu at a moment when their member states, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, have effectively walked away and even formed their own bloc. Now, before stepping down, President Tinubu made a passionate plea. ECOWAS must finally roll out its standby force so it can move quickly to protect democracies under threat. It was a clear signal that talk alone may not be enough to keep the region together. So here's the big question. How can ECOWAS strike the right balance between firm diplomatic engagement and credible military deterrence without alienating those breakaway states even further? Now today, I'm joined by Jamiu Adebayo. He's a media strategist and humanitarian activist. We will begin with him, and the rest of the guests will actually join us later. Thank you so much for joining us on The Conversation, Jamiu.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, Jamiu, speak to us about, the power change in ECOWAS. So many people seem to think that ECOWAS is losing its grip, especially with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso breaking away and forming the AES alliance. Would you say that ECOWAS is still a meaningful regional bloc?
Oh, yes. Thanks again for having me. Yes, ECOWAS is still a meaningful bloc. It's still a very powerful bloc within the African continent. And the power change where the chairman of ECOWAS, the President Bola Tinubu, has actually completed his term. And then we have President Julius of Sierra Leone taking the reins. Now, okay, so there is a tripartite arrangement for power sharing. Usually, there exist Anglophone countries, the Francophone countries, and the Lusophone countries for this power to rotate from amongst them. So what has been done now is to reinforce the belief that, one, ECOWAS is sustainable, ECOWAS is advancing, ECOWAS is powerful, and ECOWAS is still very much in force. So with the AES countries, that's Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, with their exit, not much has changed. While I believed that there are ongoing efforts, concerted efforts to ensure that everybody comes to an alignment and an agreement, I believe the region, the bloc, has propelled itself and has moved on. So recently, the bloc celebrated its 50th anniversary in Lagos. And I'm sure you saw how colorful the event was, where even Yakubu Gowon, one of the founding fathers of the bloc, who is still very much alive and hearty, praised that occasion. So as for how powerful ECOWAS is still very much powerful. While people do not want to agree, we don't want to agree, was because I feel the democratization of diplomacy has actually allowed for, different levels of engagement for people to come together and agree on the way forward. So while doing that, the president, the last chairman, who is the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, used different means within his power to ensure that these countries remain within the bloc. However, it's not too late for them to return to the bloc, and I'm sure the new chairman of the bloc is going to continue from where the president has anchored on. He'll build on that foundation and ensure that it strengthens for regional cooperation, for the advancement of economic integration, and for the sustenance of democracy in West Africa.
Okay. Well, I'm told that our guests have joined us. We also have Dr. Sam Amadi. He's a director, the Abuja School of Political Thought. social and political thoughts in Abuja, Nigeria. And we also have Honorable Anthony Oneya. He's a security analyst and managing director of Genel Chuko Security Services. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on the show.
Thank you.
So let me come to you, Dr. Sam Amadi. Now, you did hear the first question, if ECOWAS is losing its grip, and Jamiu did say that he doesn't think ECOWAS is losing its grip. Let's hear your thoughts, and if you think that ECOWAS can really deploy a standby force, according to President Tinubu. Please go ahead. Hello, Dr. Sam, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah, sure.
Yeah, please go ahead. I was speaking to you.
Yeah, what's the question? I didn't get the question well.
The question I asked is if you think that ECOWAS is losing its grip, because with three countries, that's Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, breaking away and forming their own alliance. So many people have said that it might not still be a meaningful regional bloc. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think to an extent, yes. ECOWAS, if you get three member countries pulling out and forming, and pulling out in very controversial and not pleasant situation, and forming their own confederacy, it weakens ECOWAS. But that's not the only problem. So it's a subtraction. And because it's not already a very large member nation, like AU, that is very many countries. So if 5 people pull out, it may not constitute much problem, like when Morocco left. But in this case, you're talking about a limited number of members. But what is really, I think, more damaging is the reason they left, which is that ECOWAS has not been seen as effectively representing the aspiration of West African people in terms of 3 levels. One, economic emancipation. ECOWAS has been a little bit less, forceful in helping those countries extricate themselves from the dominance and the exploitation of France, primarily. And ECOWAS has not been able to create the kind of economic dynamism that will help those countries, develop. If you look at the world map of poverty, many of the ECOWAS countries are top on that list. So that's a question of relevance. It's not solving the problem. Again, look at security. The Sahel, the Gulf of Guinea, now most of these countries themselves are very much troubled and fragile. So in a sense, what is making ECOWAS irrelevant is scorecard. It's not doing enough. I mean, in the days of peacekeeping, it was great and people saw and had relevance. But now, ECOWAS is becoming very, very irrelevant by virtue of the change in the global economy, global politics, the fact that it's not doing enough to satisfy the progressive ideals and aspirations of its people. And again, one can argue that in the last 2-3 years, maybe for no fault of Tinubu, but primarily the diplomacy has not worked to create a kind of a win-win in the sense of collective ownership, especially among those countries. So yes, ECOWAS related in terms of relevance, effectiveness, is less so than the last 6 or 10 years when ECOWAS was effective in terms of even if it is peacekeeping. So ECOWAS has lost significant relevance to some of the African citizens and in terms of global competitive politics.
Okay. Now let's hear if Honorable Oneya feels the same way. Honorable, now President Tinubu called for the immediate activation of the ECOWAS standby force. But after nearly 2 decades of discussions, what actually is stopping it from being fully operational?
Oh, okay, thank you. First and foremost, I would want to agree with the doctor that just spoke. The question is, what are you activating? What exactly are we activating? I would say I grew up in a family of of the ECOWAS. My late father was part of ECOWAS when the Samuel Doe and Charles Taylor crisis started in Liberia. Then my time after military school took me to train with the ECOWAS itself. So what are you activating? Where is the ECOWAS? What happened to ECOWAS? You know, there was a time when the ECOWAS was run by the ECOWAS. Then later, it now became a United Nations subset. You know, now you want to activate a system or a unit that is already running the affairs under the United Nations. These persons do not understand. I mean, I'm talking of when ECOWAS was ECOWAS, they knew how to defend the economic states, the West African states, the regions under their purview. So now you want to activate persons or a unit to come and take over a system that has already gone bad, because the ECOWAS itself has its own flaws. They're not to talk of, the ECOWAS itself has its own flaws. They're not to talk of activating a system that, in my opinion, if you're calling for such an activation, you would first look at what destabilized them in that first place. Because one of the major forces that handled the ECOWAS was the Nigerian army, the Nigerian armed forces. Yeah. They were more prominent under the ECOWAS. So you had soldiers from Nigeria always going to keep peace in these nations like Liberia, Sierra Leone, and all of that. You know, now you have crisis here in Nigeria, and we're talking about activating that subset, that unit. Where will this force come from? Okay. Where will they come from?
Okay. Now, coming back to you, Jamiu. Jamiu, after ECOWAS imposed heavy sanctions on Niger last year, many people, many quarters said that it pushed the junta forward or further towards Russia. Now, can you tell us, are these economic tools hurting people or are they hurting the people more than the junta? Do you think that, the sanctions are working or backfiring?
Okay, so thank you again. I think we need to lay some bases for this discussion. One, it should not primarily be based on ECOWAS intervention. All right, so most times it's always a last resort. Okay, so having said that, I will also want to disagree with the notion that says these Sahelian countries left ECOWAS because of some of these theories. I consider them theories because, of course, the military hunters would always have reasons to adduce for their actions. But then, let me take your mind back to 2001. There's this protocol on democracy and good governance promulgated then by the regional bloc. Then, and it was meant to strengthen democracy and also to ensure constitutional rule. Okay? Now, there is a clause in that protocol of 2001 which say they can trigger, there's a trigger mechanism which says if any country of the regional bloc goes the way of military junta, that means any military incursion, then there's an automatic suspension. So that means when there is declaration of military junta in a particular country under ECOWAS, automatically ECOWAS is allowed to trigger that suspension. So they'll be suspended from the bloc. Having been suspended from the bloc, these three countries felt like there must be some reasons which they can give their citizens to adduce for their exit from the bloc. And that's why they've come up with the fact that ECOWAS has not been able to support them in terms of military resources, economy, and all that. Definitely, there will always be reasons adduced. Now, back to your question. We need to also understand the fact that Nigeria, under the leadership of President Bola Tinubu, who was, until yesterday the chairman of the bloc, has been able to invoke some things to convene the first ever West African Economic Summit, which held in Abuja 2 to 3 days ago, all right, to ensure that there is regional participation in economic situations and also the integration and alignment of economic forces. Now, having said this, we'll also understand the fact that, because I have on record that invitations were sent across to these Sahelian countries, okay? Now, the fact that they did not attend does not mean ECOWAS is not, going forward in its efforts to ensure everybody comes on board, okay? Now, you have a situation where there is 12 to 13%, economic advancement around the bloc, which is extremely low. Low. And the president now said, okay, let's come together as a bloc to fashion out ways on how we can, align policies along economic lines. Let's ensure Abidjan to our Lagos expressway is done. Of course, I know you understand, you agree with me that $15.6 billion has been already facilitated by the African Development Plan to ensure that that corridor is actualized in the next couple of years. And of course, the design is in place just to ensure mobility and to ensure that this economic stuff is aligning. For the first time ever, over 20 years of financial liability was cleared by President Bola Tinubu. Why? You think Nigeria has so much money? No, just to ensure that the region issues along finances, to ensure that ECOWAS is able to fully carry out its functions. And these are some of the reasons why the president says, rather than, of course, you want to use carrot and stick method sometimes, stand by forces, this and that, but then he came back and said, okay, let's use diplomacy, let's democratize diplomacy. And if you check very well, you see that the Nigerian Commission is still very much alive. Till date, it's still functional. So there is this issue between the military junta, the ruling military junta in Niger Republic, and the Chinese oil farms in Nigeria. They have issues around, sanctions and some stipulations where they asked the Chinese oil farms to pay $80 billion US. They could not, so they left. Now they had oil crisis. Around this same time, they came to Nigeria seeking help. Big brother, cultural integration, economic possibilities. And Nigeria gave them, I think, over 300 tanker trucks of PMS. That is what an approximately around 13.5 million liters. That's the big brother. Now, having said this, rather than ensure that we have, democracy institutionalized in Africa, there are some forces outside the continent who are hell-bent on using some other weaker countries to actualize their own aim for a bigger power. Okay? So these countries may actually, in their own, estimations, feel like they are more secure with some interest rather than being around. But then the conversation continues. The experiment that they are currently carrying out is something that I do not think would last long, because democracy has come to stay in Africa, and it has come. And I don't think that's too much to ask. ECOWAS is asking these countries to return to democratic rule, return to constitutional rule. So the whole thing around military junta should be discouraged, and that's what the current ECOWAS is doing. If you're saying the ECOWAS,
okay, Jamiu, let's sorry to cut you off, but let's also hear from other people. Dr. Sam Amadi, please, let's have your thoughts. I had asked Jamiu a question earlier about Russia being the new kingmaker in the Sahel, and the ECOWAS pushing them towards Russia. The AES states, strengthening their military ties with Russia and distancing themselves from ECOWAS. Do you think that Moscow is now more influential than Abuja or Accra in shaping the Sahel security?
On the dynamics that the other African countries, West African countries play. Again, Russia and China have been strong, penetrating and expanding their influence in the West African geopolitics, and African geopolitics as a matter of fact, for a long time. And now that they seem to be fully in charge, or mostly in charge, of policy and defense, defense and security in these three African countries. I think the influence has grown, but whether it will be overwhelming will depend on the role that how Nigeria plays in the emerging geopolitics. So Nigeria has good relationship with China. Nigeria doesn't have quite notable or anyhow significantly good relationship with China, with Russia. Not much really. Nigeria has good with the West, US, UK, and others. Now, the big question will be: is Nigeria able to exercise the decisive influence that it ought to exercise in the West African region, and I used to exercise? So, even though Tinubu has handed over the chair yesterday, we heard that there was strong consensus of pressure on him to continue, because Nigeria basically funds ECOWAS, and President Tinubu has to shrug it off and say, look, Nigeria will continue to shoulder much of the financial responsibility, but perhaps it's time to transition leadership. So the first point there is that Nigeria will determine largely the outcome. Now, does Nigeria have both the economic strength, the kind of coherence, political coherence, and the policy space to put together the rest of the ECOWAS countries minus these three and create a strong pushback against what was going to be tactical maneuver by Russia using those two countries? When they do that, I think that's really what will determine the outcome. But it seems to me that today Russia has an anchor to plug in and play, and those Burkina Faso particularly, that has been very viscerally, pro-Soviet. Of course, Mali, where now that Wagner has left, the Russian team is still working together in Niger, in Mali, and in Burkina Faso to support their defense, and they're relying on Russia. So I see the possibility of a flare-out between Nigeria and Russia regarding geostrategic issues in the West African sub-region. Again, we're dealing with terror. The issue is not a West African phenomenon. With all the terror organizations, at least two of the deadliest, being very active here in that region. So how will Nigeria engage strongly, either with the US or with other global powers, to strengthen the capacity of West Africa, minus these three countries, to read or to contend and fight terrorism? Or are we going to see a sense in which Russia might, use its influence to further damage the possibility of a West African security architecture containing the threat? Now, this all will also depend on how the global geopolitics shape up. So, if there's need for a Russian contest with the US or with France or with European countries in center of influence, proxies like Nigeria, like West Africa, then we might see Russia put in more resources to gain control. But if the expected, conflict in the geopolitical sense is less so, then we see Russia underinvest in geostrategic influence peddling and maneuvering in West Africa. So it comes down to two factors. How is the world shaping up? And will West Africa become a center for contestation? And secondly, how Nigeria is able to resolve this internal crisis and project power and show real leadership in protecting the rest of the West Africa against China. So these two equations will determine the outcome. But definitely Russia will play a key role.
Let's also hear from Honorable Onea. Honorable Onea, is a military clash between ECOWAS and the AES imminent or even possible? Because if ECOWAS deploys troops under its standby force and AES leaders reject it, are we inching towards a regional confrontation, if not a proxy conflict?
The truth is, personally, I don't expect, from everything that has played out so far, I don't think these three countries do not want a mediation. I think they expect a mediation. But you need to understand that African countries, especially West African countries, we're stubborn individuals. We're stubborn as it is. And the last speaker noted that Nigeria has been a powerhouse or a power force to ensuring that ECOWAS is still standing. I mean, thumbs up to President Bola Tinubu. He did a fantastic job. In the time he was ECOWAS chair, he did a fantastic job. And I think he focused more on economic structural development, expanding the region, and putting what the forefathers, the founders of ECOWAS had brought to the forefront over time. That was one thing I know President Bola Tinubu did, to bring that dream forward of what the founders of the ECOWAS had envisioned. Now, for the military involvement, my opinion is, yes, you can set up a standby unit and now have a mediating structure that will mediate. If the ECOWAS, off my head, say former ECOWAS presidents come together, or former ECOWAS chairs come together to say, okay, so as former ECOWAS chairs or as former presidents under the ECOWAS, we are this structure. We go and discuss this thing. Now, remember that you have most of this. So take, for instance, ECOWAS chairs that have either been military persons or have been in a military regime at one time. They can have an understanding of where these three countries are going to. In the aspect of Russia's involvement and Chinese involvement, there was a time when I think it was His Royal Highness Emir Sanusi that mentioned once that we are beginning to see recolonialism.
Okay. All right, sir. Just, if you could just hold on there,
yes.
just hold on your thoughts for a minute.
Yes.
We'll have to go on a commercial break,
yes.
and when we come back, you continue. Thank you for staying with us. Now, just before the break, Honorable Anthony Onea was actually speaking, you know, on a possible clash between ECOWAS and the AES, if it's imminent or even possible. And you were talking about colonialism just before we went on the break, Honorable. Please go ahead.
Okay, so like I was saying, you know, the former CBN governor Sanusi mentioned something a long time ago. He said we're beginning to see recolonialism happen with the Chinese and the Russians and all of that. I would say Africans, West Africans, in my opinion, we believe that if we have such partnerships, whether it's for economic partnership, military partnership, is to boost our economy, boost our military, boost all of that. But always know that we forget to read between the lines of some of these things. We forget to read between the lines of all this. It is interesting that Russia has gone to one African country. Before you know, they are going to the next African country before they are moving right now. So the interest of Russia possibly, okay, would help boost the economics of these West African nations that are involved with them. But yet, try and understand that for the interest of the people of West Africa, the ECOWAS is beginning to draw out strategic plans, strategic policies. Okay, we understand these partnerships are good, we understand these are good, but you need to understand that this is a bloc that was created for economic partnership to benefit the people of West Africa. So in my opinion, like I said, maybe there should be mediation first while you have that standby, then you see it play as it is. Because why they did not come for the meeting, off my head, it could be you guys have activated the act that says when this happens, you are suspended. Why invite me for a meeting? Okay. And the meeting isn't to mediate or have a conversation. is to attend a meeting with so much conversations, So that's my opinion about it.
All right, now let's come back to you, Jamiu. Jamiu, looking at this particular split, what is the economic cost of the split? Because right now, over 70 million people and 50% of ECOWAS's land area are now outside the bloc. What are the trade and mobility consequences for everyday West Africans?
Okay, so first we need to ask the rhetorical question: if we need sustenance of democracy or we need a return to military rule. Okay, so having cleared these, we need to understand some basic perspectives. So one, Russia is well reported to be advancing their interests in some countries of Africa because of the same reasons these countries are used for leaving their so-called colonial masters. So let's agree with that conceding that France or the French government have been exploiting some of these countries. Going to Russia is like a narrow escape. They give them a narrow scope for solutions in the immediate because they look at the immediate concerns of these people and they address it. But over a long period of time, I do not think these things are sustainable. So now look at what Africa and ECOWAS is doing. The West Africa Economic Summit is to bring together a robust discussion and policy alignment. I attended one of the conferences where they brought people from different endeavors, all right? And there was this particular customs manager who spoke, and he said they need to align policies around customs, free movement, migration, goods and services, and etc. So having laid these bases, whenever West Africa as a bloc is taking these policy decisions along economic lines, the countries of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are absent. Okay? And these three countries are landlocked. So it means they have to rely on some other countries for some of their effects, some of their businesses, and some of their day-to-day activities. So currently, there is an ongoing effort to ensure these people are brought back into the bloc. So take for instance, when one country I would consider the second regional power in West Africa, Ghana, when there was this transition recently where the new president came on board, they sent an invite, and the Burkina Faso military junta came. He was there. Nobody humiliated him. He was not harassed, and that is still in the spirit of friendship that we are brothers. We have the same color, we share the same blood, we share the same, some forms of traits and commonalities. Nigeria too had issues, they reached out to Nigeria. So it means no country can exist in isolation. You need one another for us to progress economically. Okay, and this whole idea and talk around standby forces, we are not past that era. Okay, yes, these ideas were muted, at the initial stage of these issues, but they've long been gone. Even the sanctions that were placed on these three countries have not been lifted. Why? Because some of our people too in Nigeria share cultural boundaries, share cultural, some of these traits with these people.
Especially
and then,
Niger.
just like the last speaker mentioned, His Royal Highness Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, he took on as a special envoy of ECOWAS mission to go to these countries to negotiate and see.
Okay.
See, there's no two. There are no two ways about it. There are no two ways about it. Let me hammer on this. There are no two ways about it. ECOWAS is committed to constitutional rule. These military hunters want to remain in power. Now, these are parallel situations.
Jamiu, let's pass the next question to Dr. Amadi. Dr. Amadi, let's talk about, the transparency of ECOWAS's budget, right? We know that last year, the budget was pegged at nearly $200 million, and yet we still can't field, a rapid reaction force. Where exactly would you say the money is going to, and how do the member states hold the bloc accountable?
Well, I think the problem is that ECOWAS countries are poor, basically, to 1, 2. I think ECOWAS countries are not prioritizing regional integration in their financing. And Nigeria itself is becoming kind of, Nigeria is worried about being the sole financer. So again, around where the money is going and what, I think there is perhaps a bigger bureaucracy around ECOWAS. So ECOWAS Secretary, ECOWAS Parliament, different ECOWAS court. So maybe ECOWAS is perhaps spending more at layers of bureaucracy that they need to be much more prudent. Again, ECOWAS countries carry on their socioeconomic characteristics of corrupt countries that are not perhaps well organized and frugal. So you will see allegations of corruption, allegations of maybe money being misused, lack of accountability structure. But more than that, I think because of the GDP per capita and GDP of ECOWAS country, you expect that it's not going to be a well-funded regional organization. So they're going to be a constraint. If you look at that budget, it's not too much for a regional organization that was going to do a lot in terms of economic development, policy convergences, even some interventions in terms of maybe even infrastructure, social infrastructure, education, improvement of quality of education and human capital across the zone in order to make it a competitive regional economic bloc. So I think that the core question of ECOWAS is first a reconceptualization, really, about what do we need ECOWAS to do in the current times, in reality, not in this idealism. We are moving away from a world of liberal internationalism where this notion, human rights and all kinds of things are considered as part of the standard wear for international organizations. But now we're getting to where power, military might, economic development, competitiveness is now what is defining the new world. And what that means, therefore, is that ECOWAS itself we need to rethink ECOWAS and not to abandon it, but maybe we can delay it so you become more efficient, more cost efficient, more effective intervention. And so the question of how much was the money going to is very clear what we need to do as a region and what we need to do as individual countries. And again, there is the urgent need to create wealth at regional scale. I mean, if you look at Nigeria, the leading economy, in the last 8 years, Nigeria has declined in terms of GDP growth. If you look at other ECOWAS countries, they are even worse so. Mali, Niger, now they have left. Maybe Cote d'Ivoire, Benin Republic, which some people think. I remember when I was advisor in foreign affairs many years ago under Eradua, that the president of Benin Republic used to tell us that Benin Republic ought to be a part of Nigeria, a state in Nigeria. And I think he made that point again to President Tinubu recently, because it's the economic sustainability, economic resilience, their capacity is very small. So my view will be, let's get a hold on what ECOWAS is doing, what we need to do. Let's reduce the profligacy, the corruption and the waste, and then let's also think about expanding the resources available to ECOWAS by investing more attention on economic growth, infrastructure convergence, so that with infrastructural upgrades, you're going to see a lot more of growth happening, not just in Nigeria, but spread across. That means, again, that ECOWAS leaders must not shy away from democracy. The problem of ECOWAS and Africa has been that oftentimes the leaders created as an old boys club, and they don't respond to the fact that their country, due to bad governance, their countries are becoming less important, less prosperous, poorer. And the consequence of that is that ECOWAS itself will be poorer, ECOWAS itself will be less effective, and ECOWAS itself will be mission adrift and almost valueless. So I think that there is still the leftover of the early period of post-colonial politics, where the idea was to preserve ourselves, to shield ourselves from critique, and to help each other keep power. And you see that with the peacekeeping, even when there's no civil war, with the idea of condoning electoral malpractice across the zone. So first is get rid of, rethink this idea, make it functional.
Dr. Amadi,
and invest more in
All right, Dr.
centers of
Amadi, you did talk
economic growth.
about, how ECOWAS needs to rethink its identity. I mean, after 50 years, this question is for you now, Honorable Nea. Do you think that it is time for ECOWAS to redefine its mission, make it less about political enforcement and more about regional resilience and grassroots development, or something else?
Yeah, I totally agree with Dr. Amadi. It's been 50 years. I wrote an article recently. I've been an admirer of the ECOWAS for a long time. Like I said earlier, I come from a family that was part of the ECOMOG.
Okay, Dr. Onea. All right, we lost him there. Let's come back to you, Jamil, if you could answer that question. Do you think that ECOWAS needs to rethink its identity? Jamil? All right, now let's, come back to Dr. Amadi. But before that, let's go for a break. Thank you for staying with us. Well, sadly, we would have to wrap up the show now, and there has been so much, being said about, ECOWAS, them rethinking their identity, so many questions about ECOWAS's credibility, and if it is time for Plan B, if definitely ECOWAS will be able to redeploy standby forces. So many talks, about that, but then I think this is something that would have to take time to rediscuss at a later time. But I would like to thank our guests who joined us, Dr. Sam Umadi, Director of the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. We had Jamiu Adebayo as well, a media strategist and humanitarian activist. And we also had Honorable Anthony Onea. He's a security analyst and Managing Director of Oganeochukwu Security Services. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And with that, we conclude today's episode of The Conversation. Remember to catch up on all missed episodes on our YouTube channel at News Central. You can also watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, GoTV channel 23, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Until I come your way again next time, I'm Darshan Usman. Goodbye.